one. We're at least going to have 5 today. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming. Very excited to be here and very excited to talk about failure and failing spectacularly. My name is Leonardo Aliaga. We have a wonderful panel here. Dr. Lalena Yarris, Dr. Jeremy Branzetti, Dr. Adaira Landry, and Dr. Mike Gisondi. We would love to share with you some of our stories and trials and tribulations and insights. But before that, I want to share with you a quick story. It's an old Japanese tale called The Story of the Four Horses. Anybody heard of it? No? Oh, good. Even better. So it is said that there are 4 horses, excellent ones, good ones, poor ones, and bad ones. The best horse will run fast and slow, turn left and right, and follow all of the driver's commands before it ever sees the shadow of the whip. The second horse will follow all those commands right as the whip is about to reach its skin. The third horse will follow commands after it feels pain on its body. And the fourth horse is the worst horse. The worst horse runs and follows commands when that pain has penetrated down to the marrow of its bones. And so when we hear that story, almost all of us want to be the best horse. But that's a problem, because when we learn too easily, we're tempted not to work hard, not to penetrate down to the marrow of the practice. And if you study calligraphy, what you'll find is that those who are not so talented with their hands usually become the best calligraphers. Those who are very talented often encounter great difficulty after they've reached a certain stage. So the best horse may be the worst horse, and the worst horse may be the best. For if it perseveres, it will have learned whatever it is practicing all the way to the marrow of its bones. And so when we hear this story, I know it's pretty harsh. It's a harsh way to look at learning from failure. But it's not the only way. So that idea of failing spectacularly, like what does that mean? Or what does it mean to fail at all? Another way we can understand failure is through something called the zone of proximal development. Maybe some of you have heard of it. For those of you who haven't, here's the quick and dirty refresher. So these 3 circles represent what a learner can and cannot do. The red circle is stuff that is way too hard, like they just can't do it even with help. The green circle in the middle is stuff that they can do, it's way too easy. They can do with their eyes closed, hands tied behind their back. And the stuff in the middle, that is the zone of proximal development. That's where things start to become difficult, but not so difficult that with some help the learner can still do some of these things. And then something very special happens at the edge of the zone of proximal development. This is where the learner is literally at the edge of their abilities. They are challenged in all the right ways. They are forced to realize that some of their mental schemas are faulty or incomplete. This is where real growth happens. But something else happens here. And you can probably guess what I'm going to say. Mistakes, errors, failure. So in some way, errors and failure are evidence that someone has been working at the edge of their zone of proximal development, which most of the time is a good thing. Well, it turns out that there's something else you get from making mistakes and failing, like a hidden advantage. And it works a little like this. Let's say you have to solve some problem. And in order to solve that problem, you have to call up your mental schema for how you think that problem works. And you get the problem wrong. Like, you fail at solving the problem. And then you realize, oh, crap, my mental schema is incorrect. And then so what you end up doing is, as you're learning from the mistake, you end up comparing your incorrect mental schema to a more correct mental schema. And seeing the contrast, like the similarity and differences between those 2 schemas, it shows you something powerful. It highlights the underlying conceptual features of the problem, which is an overly complicated way of saying you just get a deeper understanding of the problem. And as you refine your mental schema, again, something special happens where you start to almost like peel back the surface layers of the problem. And as you peel back those surface layers, it's almost like you can see the problem's underlying conceptual structure. And that is the hidden advantage that you gain when you fail and make a mistake. And why does that matter? Because that provides a certain kind of learning that is very powerful. And you are less likely to be fooled by problems like this or similar to this the next time you encounter them. So, enough intro. That was just to help set the stage for how we can reframe or rethink failure and failure experiences. And now we would love to share with you how we have failed spectacularly. We have 5 of us here, and we would love to start with Dr. Lalena Yarris.
So I just want to start off by saying that I've had a lot of traditional failures, like submitting papers that got rejected or applying for jobs that I didn't get, things that I've done that I wish I would have done differently. And I've chosen to talk about instead a time in my professional career which was really the most challenging and painful useful time, probably like beyond, probably not way too much time. But to kind of highlight why I felt like a failure during that time and the lessons that I learned. Because although it was a very challenging time, it was also probably the time that taught me the most in my professional career. So to give you a little bit of context, I'm just going to try to summarize the context of my department at the time in a way that I hope is brief and just relies on information that was publicly available. So I was in a department that was under a time of tremendous turmoil several years ago. There were a lot of concerns being raised about our leadership. Those concerns came from residents, faculty, and staff. And as a result of that, we were at an all-time low in terms of faculty morale, all-time high in terms of faculty attrition, and particularly among women. We lost a lot of really talented women during that time. As a result, there were a lot of impacts on education, and the learners had low morale, and the learners had very valid concerns about their educational environment. And I was the program director at that time. So a lot of those complaints came to me, and it was my obligation to bring those forward. And because of the environment of our department, bringing those forward had severe consequences to me from a professional standpoint. At the same time, one of the concerns that was raised by an individual was from a social worker in our department who had felt like she had been in a relationship that ended in harassment. And that was a kind of separate issue from the other issues that were going on, but that became both internal and external when multiple legal complaints were filed, resulting in finally a $45 million lawsuit. And the lawsuit at the time that it was filed was both filed and released to the press on the same day. So although that lawsuit actually named a resident in a different department, within the context of the lawsuit, there was not only a lot of information about our department, our leadership, and her own experience with our department leader, but there were 14 other institutional leaders who were named in the lawsuit as being involved in the sense that they were aware of harassment and did not report it appropriately. And I was one of those leaders named. So throughout this whole process, I felt like a failure in many ways. The first way that I felt like a failure was that I realized I was not politically savvy or organizationally experienced enough to protect myself as events started to unfold. And as a result, I was not able to protect my residents from the collateral damage and the harm that happens to learners when they're in a part of the turmoil. The second way that I felt like a failure was I was a residency director in a program that was really suffering, and I was not able to address many of the very valid concerns that came up, despite my best effort and intent, because of what I was going through, because of feeling powerless in the situation. And the third reason I felt like a failure is that there was this narrative that became public, and I had a small piece in the narrative, but for me that piece was huge. And the narrative that was brought forward for me was so discordant to my values and how I saw myself. And despite the fact that there were factual inaccuracies in legal complaints, which there always are, that didn't matter. What mattered was there was this narrative out there that was extremely painful for me to navigate. So as this process was resolved over actually years with institutional site visits, large investigations by former attorney generals, and eventually the lawsuit being dismissed and settled, I learned a lot throughout the process. I learned first that, and this was really like an end of the innocence for me, I learned that decisions in institutions, organizations, and in legal processes are not always based on what's true or what is ethically right, or you feel is ethically right. And I don't say that to be discouraging or I say it in terms of like that realization was important to me to move forward in a system where that's the reality and figure out how to be myself and do the best that I can. The second lesson I learned through this process and all of the different ways that it impacted me was a life personal lesson, which was how to let go of what people think of you. And I realized early on, there were 3 camps. There was like this camp that would read things and immediately believe them to be true, and there's nothing I could do about that, and that was really heartbreaking for me. There's the second camp that was probably much bigger than I realized, that like didn't read anything, didn't care, had no impact on me at all. And then there was this third camp of people who were coming from quite far away and would call me and say, you know, I don't care what I read, I know you, I believe in you, I have your back. But really in the end, the only thing that matters is how we all feel about ourselves. We know our truth, we know our decisions, and that's the thing that I'll have to submit. So letting go of that attachment to what people think was a very, I'm not saying that I'm there, but that was a big lesson that this process taught me the importance of. And then finally, I learned a lot about having difficult conversations. I had to have a lot of difficult conversations with my residents through this entire process, if you can imagine. And through that, I found my blueprint for how to show up when I have to talk about hard things. And for me, 3 pillars are to be present, to speak from the heart, and to be willing to be vulnerable and show them who I really am. So, and to speak from my own experience, really. You know, that's all we really have to show experience. So that's my brief discussion of that difficult period in my life. I hope that the growth lessons are somewhat beneficial to you, and I'm excited to turn it over to my colleagues.
The hot seat. Dr. Adaira Landry.
So this is going to be a story about the draw to chase titles. So when I came out of Belcher, I got a master's at the same time in education, as I was sort of closing that up, a position opens in my department as being AD. And I had no intention initially of going into residency leadership, but I thought, well, this is going to give me a clear place, a clear role, clearly defined value to the department, so it would make a lot of sense to take the position. And so I did it, and I actually, for the first 2 years, loved it. And even still, as I reflect on it, I still loved the position. I loved connecting with residents. I felt like I was making a meaningful difference for, especially the women and women of color in the residency, so I really valued that time. And at some point as well, the fellowship director role opened up. And so I said to myself, sure, I mean, if you guys need me, I'm happy to help and step up and take that position as well. And so that was like around year 2 or 3 into my role as an AD. I was also a fellowship director for 4 years now. And then another position opened up, and as an advisor for the medical school. So at one point in time, I was still a junior faculty member, maybe 2 or 3 years out of residency, or out of fellowship. I had a position as APD, as a fellowship director, and as an advisor to 40 students in the medical school who I was directly responsible for. And in addition to that, I had 2 children. One was a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old, who were also entering the community. And I was looking at my CV during preparing my annual review, and I realized that I had all these options, all these things that added like a title under leadership, but I hadn't really added anything to my CV as far as lectures or papers or research. None of that. It was all the same as it was 4 or 5 years before that. There was no growth in that direction. And I was on shift one day, and a colleague of mine who started the same year as I did. There were actually 5 of us who started the same year. 2 of us became APs, and the other 3 took on no leadership titles at all. And I was sitting next to one of them, and he was telling me about how he's now a professor at some other institution, and he's opening his own research group, and all of these amazing accolades. And I knew I'm not one to advocate comparing, I'll be honest, except if what someone else was doing and you want to do. In that case, like, it makes sense to naturally say, how are you doing that? Like, what is going on? And he said, well, like, what's your day like? And I was like, well, like, I have a shift, but before the shift, I spent 6 hours in meetings. I was meeting with my residents, and I had meetings with my fellowship, and I had meetings. He's like, you are in too many meetings to do anything productive. Like, you're just drowning yourself with meetings. And it became very clear to me that these titles that I was sort of, truly, I feel like I was sort of chasing this validation. Like, oh my God, I'm going to be fitting in more with the department, and I have more of an understanding of my role here. In many ways, actually slowed my growth down. And like I said, I'm grateful for the opportunities and people I work with, but same time, I realized objectively, those 3 other people who started the same year as I did not have titles during that window, and they were just moving their career in a direction where I could tell that they were growing as individuals versus focusing just on the development of other people. And so for me, like, we're using the word failure, but to me it was like this period of enlightenment where I just became very aware of how it's easy for us to get trapped, especially the junior faculty member, in chasing sort of responsibility that's like formalized and organized before we have really developed a sense of who we are as a person and what it is that we want to achieve as an individual. Instead, I sort of move straight into let me help other people, which I think is a little thing to do, but at the same time I realized that it sort of stalled my own growth.
Thank you so much for sharing. Yes, you are.
Okay. So this is going to be a story about a time in my career that was the most challenging. It's really one about professional identity formation. But the story will be interesting to you because it's common. And I'll tell you that, like, this is background, I don't like money. Okay? I don't like talking about money. I get very nervous when people are paying a check. I want everyone to do their part, and I don't like some of these for me, it's very nervous. I don't know how the stock market works, and many people have tried to explain it to me, and I still don't understand how it works. And you can try afterwards, I just follow along with it. So I really don't like it. And that sets people up for failure, and it means it's life is not. And in a time of great personal professional growth in my life, I had a problem with money. I was making less money 1 year than I did before, and then I made less money the following year. And this is at a time when my career was running houses. I was lecturing all over the country. I was publishing more than I published in the past. I thought a very successful program director. It's not my current situation. And I delivered competitive match classes. My seniors got great jobs. I did all the things. I was offered to be the director of our Academy of Medical Educators at that institution, and I took that role under the advisor of my chair, who thought I was crazy at first. And I explained to him the offer, gave him advice, and he fired the person before me. The person before me made less money. She only had X amount of budget, so percent FTE buyout less than this person had. She said, in the next fiscal year, here's what we'll go. I'll find more money for you. This year, you're going to have to do the job and do this. And I told him this, and I was like, I feel like I should say no to that. That's I'm not good at money. That's done. He's like, no. Just ask for more money than you would have gotten automatically in the second. You should ask for this. It's like, he gave me the figure, so I floated into my said yes. This is all very complicated, right? I had licenses and shares, and everybody counseling me. I don't like money. So this plays itself out in my annual review, and I find out that I'm making less money than the year before. And I have to say I found out because the annual review, they gave me their annual salary letter. I experienced this as well. And if it wasn't for that salary letter, I would have no idea what to do. And if they didn't provide last year's salary letter next to that year's salary letter, I wouldn't have known. And they did. And I looked at it and I had an emotional reaction. Because that number was how much they value as a colleague, as a contributor to the department. It's a value statement of how good of an academic I was. And I felt like I should be taking I wasn't. I went into this in a number of ways. I had a number of conversations with our DFA, who's not a physician. It's the person that is not having this conversation with patient, DFA, who doesn't understand why I'm upset. And to him, it's just math. I went on a fact-finding mission first morning that then I'm working less cleanly because I have all these responsibilities now. Therefore, I'm making less RVUs, therefore I'm generating less money for the department, therefore my salary is down. And, you know, that makes logical sense in many ways. And I found solace in the numbers because I felt like, well, all right, maybe they're not being the value judgment of the company, except they're being the value judgment of the company because they knew when they told me to take this role, this would happen at the time. Right? So no one gives you an offer to be like the program director and the academy director and say, like, you should totally take this job, you're going to make less salary. That's never how the sell goes. But that's effectively what happened. And they could have anticipated, right? They could have said, and I was a fellowship director, so 3 times. They could have said, you know, as we buy you down, we will keep your salary constant, whole, because we value the work you're doing, what you bring to the department. Those statements could have been. So I came at it emotionally at first, and I went on this fact-finding mission, and, you know, and then I came back again emotionally and had a conversation with the chair about how I felt. And a very kind man, you know, listened compassionately, and I think really hurt my salary issue. So, and I look back on this time, and I think there are lessons to be learned. So, one, I should know more about, like, I should just do more responsible. And I still don't know. But, you know, that's one lesson. Lesson 2 is that I should have gone on the fact-finding mission much earlier, because perhaps I would have made different decisions along the way in terms of conversations I had, arguments that I thought I was making. I don't know whether I would have said no to the job. This is the interesting part, right? So, my entire career I've said I care more about time than money. I care a lot about time. And if you're going to offer to buy my time down for me to do 120% effort work, it's going to serve my professoriate promotion packet, writing and speaking, all these things. I'm probably going to say yes to that, even if I knew that I would have a salary too. And it wasn't, we're not talking about significant, we're talking about $2,000 for a few things. But it was still right? So would I have said yes to those things I probably would have if I had known everything that I know now. But deliberately, it would have been done too, which is what I thought. So those are my lessons. I don't know if any of that resonates. Probably all of them have knowledge or check. This is not part of the story, but you know, maybe the part about how your salary leads to, you know, your self-notion, right? When you think of your own ability, skills, problems, right? Mine was completely linked to that figure and the difference that figure had. And could not separate myself as an institution. So it was so perhaps similar part of the job. So that's why I failed.
Dr. Branzetti.
Leo, may I borrow that for 1 moment? This will be relevant, I promise. Your Honor, I swear I'm going somewhere. Okay. So, my colleagues also have given great stories. I think you can hear a lot of themes come up in my head. But I want to take a moment to point out which is the direction we're about to go. The title, right? Versus I have professors and directors and chair and vice chairs on, right? And where have I gone? My failures I washed out. I was an 11-year career APD, and through a combination of factors that, even if we're not recording, I can't talk about it yet. It's just not ready for. Plus, it's going to be my own personal therapy / complaint session, and not something for you guys to learn from. I washed out. I was involuntarily taken out of my program job, I'll say. So I want to take and sit for a moment what that feels like to go into being in the wilderness professionally, from where you may or may not be now. Is there anybody here who has a title in your department? Just any title. So, may I ask you, I saw your hand very briefly, what was yours?
Director of Equity and Inclusion.
All right, Director of Equity and Inclusion. If you are at a cocktail party with a bunch of lay people, how long does it take up before who you are is tied, who are you, tell me about you, is what you do? How long does it take before that comes out?
It's short amount of time.
A minute or less?
Yeah.
Too short in this
Right.
country.
Right. Take it to the next level. You guys are in a committee, okay? It's a committee meeting of other people who are like, hey, we're the ADM task force. Let's talk about something important. When everybody goes and introduces each other, it's not really your name, it's not really what you care about, it's I'm so-and-so, I'm at so-and-so, and I do this with my list of titles. So imagine you're stripped of that, right? You don't have that title. You're not an academic faculty at a big name institution. You have pride in it. So just sit with that for a moment. Where your identity is, right? Who are you? How do you introduce yourself at that party or in that session or that? How do you provide the clout to back up the knowledge and skills you know you have, right? Maybe we want to get a grant, or maybe we want to create an idea. Maybe you want to take something in a positive direction. But you depend on a lot of those things to be able to at least open that door. And frankly, vice versa. We assume that about others, right? I can, as a quick story, many people probably know who I'm about to refer to, and I promise this is a voluntary thing, but I tell you a story about someone who was a program director, ascended to be a vice chair, and then 2 years later said they took a program director job. Your first thought is like, that's not right. That's backwards. That's not supposed to be that way. Now, if anybody knows Dan, this is about a choice that this is something that makes him happy. But when you hear that from the outside, you don't know about that person, you start thinking lots of things. So this is a wilderness I found myself in when I lost my position and then I left from academia for a while. And I think the lesson I want to try and teach this is touching on all the things that everybody's mentioned here. A lot of who we identify ourselves as identity, your professional, anything beyond that personal identity, are the trappings of the things that we do. And that's important sometimes because sometimes we choose those positions and we do that wholeheartedly, realizing that it's really where we believe. But there are examples, I think, that theirs is a great one of, hey, I like this thing, I care about residents, but was it, did she want to be PE? No, but you gave a damn to want to contribute. And I think we do a lot of things because we give a damn to want to contribute. But is it really who we are and what we want to do based on an internal value, motivation, belief, or some real core concept? And the truth is, probably not. Or in many ways, it may not be. And I think a lot of us, because we are overachievers who progress in our medical careers and overcome many tests and many evaluations and letters of recommendation and residencies, you get to this point where you're kind of on autopilot and don't necessarily realize what it is that you want, but instead, it's what you're seen as or what you're supposed to do. So my challenge here was my trappings were blown away. I do not have the ability to look outside of me to then see my value because I get a lot of there, tigers, and how you doing? That kind of hey, what's going on? Right? So that comes a lot. And so you then have to make the hard choice, which is sit with what your failure is and then say, well, what are my beliefs? What are my values? And what are my motivations? And it makes you derive an identity internally. And so my lesson, my takeaway, I'm trying to make my spiel out here is failure is incredibly productive. Leo asked us to come up there were some competent questions. One of them was, would I do it again? Genuinely, I don't know. I don't know if I would do it with the crap I went through. I really don't. But I will say what I've taken away from that is I make a bunch of affirmative decisions about what I care about and have crafted a life for me now that in retrospect, holy shit, this is great. I haven't worked in overnight in 2 years. I work exactly the amount of shifts I want and when I want and where I want. I leave the country once a month to travel with my girlfriend who can work remotely. I have learned a new language. I have now found a new career that actually takes the best parts of program director. My friends at this table heard about it yet the other day about coaching, but that is the idea of helping people really achieve the stuff that they care about without a bunch of these GBS or herding cats or having to God knows what other dumb institutional things like that. So many people on so many lists. Anyway, the point being that finding that, sometimes you need to strip kick in the ass to be able to get to that point, but it really can be an important way to decide what you want to do in your life. Other piece of advice, because I know Peter, you'd asked to do this, and since I read the assignments, and work with my colleagues. Exactly. I feast on your capability. Only because I've known Mike for 5 and many years. Okay, so one, if you are an institutional leader, it is on you to create a culture where failure is acceptable. Period, end of story. There is no way to expect people who have been through high school, college, med school, been told learn this by date Y as measured by test X and get that letter of recommendation to get in somewhere. There's no way that they're going to come in and intrinsically be like, I need to hear from learn. They know, we've taught them otherwise. And so it's on us to create a culture where that's okay. And the best way to do that is role model. So when you can say like, oh man, I saw this patient, like I was way off my diagnosis. Here's what I learned. I'm going to do this differently. It so destigmatizes the concept of people that you really may make an impact that you don't really realize. And many, many other ways you can say like, oh man, I was wrong. Oh, that was a good point. Whoops. And you know, there are obviously this hardcore ways where God forbid, you know, like somebody a patient dies. It's a really big thing that happens. This is a good thing. There are ways to turn that into positive. You get the idea. Day-to-day stuff, mutual failures are okay. And in a personal sense, I think sitting with it is important. I think you have to be able to acknowledge that it happened. There's in like coaching or values-based kind of things. It's kind of the presence to be able to really be there with the moment of this is how I feel. The feels are okay. What do I do about the feels? So that's the next question. And one of the tools you can try to do is this idea of seniors are tried as a failure CV, right? If you've ever written your own CV, it is the most polished version of you. But underneath that, like how many schools, how many medical schools did you apply to, and how many did you get to, right? How many times did you apply to that last job? How many times did that paper get rejected? All of these things, if you really list out your failures and you say, oh, wow, that's a lot more than my successes, and yet here I am. It's remarkably empowering, and doubly, if you're a leader, show other people. Show what you have. All right, that's me now.
You're speaking to my soul. So, these are really big and powerful stories, and I mean they're like things on a very big level, much bigger level than the story I'm about to tell you. I realized I should have prepared several in case I needed to choose a bigger story. But so before emergency medicine, I started out life as a neurosurgery resident. And I was doing neurosurgery at UCLA for about 4 years, and then as a PGY4 switched to EM. But as a surgical intern, this story happens when I was an intern in neurosurgery. I'd spent the first 3 months in the neuro ICU, like learning procedures. And I thought, wow, this is great. No rounding. I just get to do central lens all day long. You get really slick with procedures. And it's like, this is great. They said residency would be tough. And yeah. And then so my first actual rotation was on the liver ICU, like the liver transplant team. And one day, one of the liver fellows, one of the surgery transplant fellows says, hey, Leo, this patient on the ward has a Hickman catheter. Can you go take it out? And for those of you who don't know, a Hickman catheter is a tunneled venous catheter. And the way it's, when you see it on the outside, it's just skin, a little hole, and the catheter comes out. There's nothing else. And you wonder, how does bacteria and everything else not go in? Well, when they put the catheter has a little cuff, like a little piece of cotton around it that forms scar tissue. And then that's what forms the seal around. And so to remove a Hickman, you have to dissect out that scar tissue. And then once it's loose, then you pull the catheter. So as was the custom at the time, I looked this up on YouTube. And it's like how to remove a Hickman catheter. And it's like, okay, I can wrap my head around that. I've done lots of other procedures, more complicated. I can sort of grasp the entirety of that procedure. And I get my stuff. I get my lidocaine supplies. It's sterile and set up. And numb up the chest. And it was sometimes the cuff is close enough to the opening that just from the opening you can, but it wasn't. It was higher up. So make a little incision where I could sort of feel the cuff and start dissecting. And so this is me, intern Leo, like by myself. No one else is there. And dissecting, and I am using a little too much, a little too aggressive with my dissection. I'm using sharp dissection instead of blunt dissection. And but success at some moment, and I'm like dissecting, and I feel the catheter go loose. And I'm like, great, the cuff is loose, ready to pull. And I tell the patient, take a big breath in, hold it, and pull. And what comes out, you can imagine, was this piece about this long. In that moment, I realized I'd cut the catheter with my too aggressive dissection. And yeah, and I cannot describe the fear and terror I felt at that moment. This was on the 8th floor of the hospital, and this pit of my stomach just sank to the basement, 8 floors down, 9 floors down. And deep down inside I thought like, okay, well that's it, game over, man. Like, it's been nice being a doctor, game over. And very quickly, frantically, like, oh shit. So I grab a mosquito and try to sneak up in to see if I can pull the other part, but it had retracted like way deeper in than I could actually get. And I thought, okay, I can like dissect a little further, but nothing. And I think, okay, like I'm not gonna solve this on my own. And I asked the nurse to page the liver transplant fellows, and I thought, like, beyond like that's it, they're gonna come in and cut my balls off, and that'll be the nice way out. That'll be the easy way out. So I started thinking like of other jobs I could do with my MD, because like I was just terrified, mortified. Like I thought, like this can't be happening. And so they come in and they, Diego and Adam, and they're from the East Coast. One trained in Philly. They both trained in Jersey. They were pretty nice guys, but they sort of had the East Coast surgery type of mentality. And they come in, and they must have seen like how terrified I was. They came in and they kind of talked me off the ledge, and they're like, hey, you know, mistakes happen, these things happen to us, we'll figure it out together. And so we tried to troubleshoot and figure it out together. They go in and each one tries to, with their bravado, like try to dissect out the thing. They can't reach it, and they're like, fuck, okay. So we get a portable x-ray, and we put a clamp on the chest, and we shoot an x-ray to see where this catheter is. And it's like right here, right under the clavicle, like dangling right at the entrance. Who knows like how much blood is pooling around there. And now he's getting like a lot of subcutaneous air in his chest. And we're like, oh crap, are we like in a pneumo? It went from bad to worse. And then, so we saw there's no way we're getting it out. And so we called IR. He went down to IR, and then through like femoral puncture, put a lasso on it, pulled it out. By the time he got down there, IR said, yeah, it was kind of twirling around in his RV. And, right? So you can easily imagine how that could have gone from bad to much, much worse to like, how are you going to explain this death or this major complication? But thankfully, nothing more happened. He got this extra procedure of having his groin punctured and having it taken out. But after he went downstairs, I was still in the room with the two liver transplant fellows, Diego and Adam. And they started sharing some of their royal fuck-ups from their residency training, their general surgery training. And I was incredibly thankful and grateful for how kind they were, how much of a psychologically safe space they created. I mean, I'm sure they must have got their asses beaten like left and right. They knew what it was like to feel that intense pain. And it was it was a very powerful experience for me. I was an intern then, and I can tell you without a doubt, it made me a much, much better surgical trainee. It made me a much better proceduralist, it made me a much better doctor, and it made me a much better teacher. Because I started thinking, like, well, like, I played that moment over and over in my mind, like, the whole day, like, from them telling me, and I have, like, flashbacks of them telling me, hey, can you do this? And I thought, yeah, like, well, what did I not miss? What did I miss on that YouTube? What did I not see that I was supposed to do? Like, what? Maybe I should have asked them to be there with me. But then it felt like a sign of weakness to ask them, because it seemed simple enough, and I realized, there are probably things that I don't even know yet to ask. So as I was reflecting on that, some of the takeaways were, well, Leo, that regardless of what you do or how good you are or how advanced you become, there will probably always be things that you don't yet know to ask. Things, danger lurking around the corner, and landmines that no one has taught you to sniff out. So one, it's helpful to ask that. What landmines are there that I don't yet know that you could possibly help show me? And it was also really powerful in terms of how to deal with that really catastrophic, when something, not catastrophic, but on the inside it feels catastrophic, when something like that happens to another trainee. So how you walk them off the ledge and how you can help them process it. Because you can very easily imagine, like if these liver fellows had come in and started just yelling and cursing and be like, what the fuck, man, what are you doing? Like, holy shit, and like yelling at me. Like, there's nothing they could have said to make me feel worse than I already felt. But they could have certainly, just poured gasoline on the fire that was already there and made it just much worse in the sense that made it much harder to reflect on any lessons learned from that. So moving forward from that, it made me much more attuned to when people make mistakes and what is necessary in order for them to transform that into something powerful and learn it, to get the lesson out of it, because it could very easily be masked by the shame that we all feel, because we all go in with a fixed mindset. We're exactly selected for that. And so we already feel the shame, and someone else can double and triple and exponentially increase that shame. When I was a fourth-year neurosurgery resident working at Harvard, there was, we took home calls 6 days a week, and there was a team of NPs and PAs that were there physically. And there was one person, one PA who was particularly skilled. He was very good. And he was so good that he was the only PA that actually did procedures. So he didn't put in EVDs or ventricular drains, but every now and then he would place like a subdural drain. And he'd done these with us, we totally trusted him. He was really, really good. So one day he tells me, yeah, I got this patient, has a subdural drain. I saw the images, and it's like, okay, it's reasonable. Yeah, it looks like it's about ready to be drained. So yeah, just call me and let me know when you're done with the drain. And then he calls me and he tells me, okay, drain's in. And I laid the patient onto his left side because it's helpful to lay them onto one side to help drain. And I paused for a moment and I said, you mean right side? The patient's on his right side. And then after that, there was a silence. Silence of about, 10 seconds, after which there was a lot of screaming and cursing and oh, fuck, and so yeah, he put it on the wrong side. Yeah, these things happen. And I realized how apropos, being at this moment. I remember this moment with Diego and Adam. And I said, I shouldn't use his name, but we'll call him Mark. Mark is not even close to him. Mark, we'll figure this out. Trust me, we will figure this out together. It's going to be okay. You're telling me the guy's still awake, his neuro exam is okay. It's unchanged, essentially. Nothing more has happened than drilling a hole in his skull on the other side. We haven't caused any more bleeding. So I drive in and we explain it to the patient. I explain it to the patient and tell him, and tell him all of the potential bad things that can come and what needs to be done. And he was actually pretty understanding about it. And afterwards debriefed with Mark, and I don't know, after he and I had a very close bond after that. As the same way I intimately and very palpably remember that moment with Diego and Adam, of feeling the sheer terror and how that could have very, very easily been turned into a terrible moment and prevented any of the learning. So I guess I share this a lot with trainees now. Sometimes I share, we do teaching sessions in the morning in the ED, and one time I shared the story, but I painted in the picture of, it was a story that I heard. When I was a surgical intern, one of my surgical friends told me this had happened to them. And sort of at the end, I get to reveal that it was me. And I found it easier for them to talk about it just in the third person, to say what they might have done and to judge if they want, judge that person. But I do tell them it was me, and how these lessons, these powerful things are very, very painful. Jeremy was saying, would I go through that again? Probably yes. Because I got so many good things out of it, but it was incredibly painful. And I totally agree. It is very helpful to share these experiences, because then they know, this shit happens to all of us, and we will learn and get better because of it. We will be less likely to be fooled by similar problems that face us in the future. So I'll stop there. What thoughts do people have? And it's okay if there are no thoughts.
I really appreciate the courage that you all had to come and talk about this. It is really, really helpful for everybody's story. I was like, oh, this could be applied to this person or to me or to somebody else, or I could use this to help a resident or whatever. So it's very helpful. So kudos to you and thank you for doing that.
Congrats on screwing up.
You're right.
Yeah.
All of us have done this,
Yeah.
or know somebody who has done it. So now I'm constantly gosh, how could I have done this better for my resident who just went through this, and
And the thing is, it's not like we're lazy. It's not like we're trying to screw up. We're always trying to do the best we can. And and so if things happen, if bad things happen, mistakes happen, yeah, it's not like we're assholes and we're just like trying to screw people over. So it sort of behooves you in like leadership to give people the benefit of the doubt and see, I mean, like salvage what they can from that terrible moment to help them grow.
If you're saying congratulations for screwing up, I mean, I should walk out of here with it or something. Because I feel like I can relate to almost every one of the stories that you get told. I've done my failures, what you're doing with yours right now, and share it. And it's not just therapeutic. It's not just therapeutic to share it. It helps me. All right, I learn from it. Right? So, but if I learn from it, I won't make that failure, make that mistake again. But if I share it, then hopefully either will all the people that I share it with, and then maybe they share it with others. And, you know, I've made a couple of horrible mistakes, personal and professional, and then one of the things that helps me is someone said it helps you sleep at night, because knowing that it's not just that I'm not going to make that mistake again. There's hundreds of people. I've told the story of my worst failure literally probably 200 times to the medical students, residents, and everything, because I don't want them to make that same mistake. Like my 100,000 patients that receive from that point forward won't experience that error again, but God was like, that makes me feel less awful about what happened.
Yeah.
Like when y'all are going through those like difficult times, especially like in the program or department setting, like who did you talk to like process or like trying to figure out like what was happening and what you wanted to do, besides like looking inwards?
I mean, I would say my situation was tough because I couldn't talk to people about parts of it. I did have a few very trusted friends that I could talk to outside. And I talked to a therapist. Yeah.
Similar, there was nobody in my department who talked to me. Zero. I trust nobody in that institution. And that's like weird thinking like how it gets structured places. But a number of people outside that were like in the education community that I built before that. I think would be the only piece of difference.
Yeah, same, for me, can't help you. But I think there's a lot of value to reaching out to people who just don't know the context and really just give you a very unbiased, distant opinion. Just to say, yeah, we're wrong. Oh no, that's totally fine. Just getting that outside opinion, very valuable.
Yeah, it was good that I started with that. For sure. One interesting part, so I announced something, but I'm not moving right away. It's recruiting to standards for our person. It's literally it's the process. So I'm not going anywhere tomorrow. They were very gracious to us. And my chair decides to meet every 2 weeks. There's this 1 month period. And he goes through all of the stages. He was pissed, mad that I was arguing. And told me one day I'm leaving because he did stuff after my head. I mean, it was all of those stages. And that made me really question all of the experiences that I had and feelings. Maybe this week, it's this I don't know. Then he's not, that's validation, right? So it was, that completed all of the good external advice I was getting. It was just every 2 weeks you share it.
There's a lot of value to actually getting mentorship and support outside of medicine too. Like a lot of my close mentors are one who's like a movie producer, one who's a lawyer, and I know that in the students, a lot of people think that, I mean, medicine is behind it all when it comes to behind the curve when it comes to career, to personal development, all that stuff's coming out of the business consulting world, and for us, we don't really talk about it as much. And theories and strategies to solving personal conflicts or dilemmas that I feel like it's just not as strong within our own field. So I do a lot of that personal struggle or how do I live my life to people outside.
And this is something you can foster right now because you're going to have these challenges, whether it's medical, advocacy, or professional challenges. So you can foster this network of people that can say, hey, I think it's sometimes I'm going to need you, if you need me, we can have these conversations. And even if the lawyers tell us, I'm not allowed to talk about this, it's completely unhealthy to us. And so I would say work on building that hybrid.
I have a question. So I was working with a junior learner the other day in the emergency department, and I found that they were kind of messing up like over and over and over again, all in the same shift. And it was really busy, hard shift. And I found that at the end of the shift, I just wanted to leave. Like I didn't have the bandwidth to give them feedback because I was halted, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. And so I'm wondering, I don't think that learner was intentionally screwing up, clearly. But I'm wondering what advice you have for role modeling that, like constructive feedback to someone who's messing up a bunch. Because sometimes it's hard. I chose not to do it in that moment.
I'm sure my colleagues are going to have some helpful advice, but I just want to say, I think what you did by just like recognizing that you were halted and just taking a pause and not doing the right thing is totally helpful and valid. And waiting until you're kind of in a better place and you can process it. I think like from your kind of well-rested brain, like, what can I get this done and be less productive? So I think that what you did was perfect.
Yeah, I agree. Sure. I think as long as you have put yourself to that, I'm not going to deal with that then. It's okay because you have to realize what your brain state at the time. It's smart. If you can attach that to like, hey, go right now, we should really talk about this shit. How about? And if you at least set it in the calendar, then you can force yourself to do it. And right, don't you know that you want attention over that one earlier time?
I did, yeah.
Good. Okay, so
over
then that
email,
means
actually.
you have the commitment to doing something like that. Many faculty later on, then you can email or be like, this happened, and then hands off, which to me that's the frustrating side. Like in that, delaying it is fine, but having to make sure there isn't talk that is better.
Yeah, the best thing you can do is pause.
I just want to say thanks for putting together this talk because I was really interested in coming. I think all of us in the environment we work in, successful people, our clinical failures all go through peer review and M&Ms and things like that too, but our professional failures and all that stuff doesn't get talked about. It's very difficult to get feedback on that. And so like you said, we're so far behind the curve in regards to professional building and interprofessional skills and all that too in medicine. This is kind of the stuff that many of us in this environment need to hear, that it happens and how to move forward and things we can learn from it really important. Thanks.
Yeah, also I just want to thank you for sharing your stories because as I listen and I hear the themes, I can hear a lot of things that kind of resonate and that I've heard my colleagues also express. I just, and it's so much that I feel like I need to sit with it. But I wish there was more people in the room to hear this because I feel like a lot of pain, you can learn a lot from it. A lot of people can learn from your stories and save them pain because, sometimes you tell yourself like, oh, maybe I'm just dropping the ball or, maybe I'm disappointing, but it was good to hear the narratives and to know that, that this is the process. So I really wish there was more people to hear this session. It was just excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is Justin.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think we're good. They're going to kick us out. One day